Welcome to probably one of the last sessions of the day that most of you will do here today. I was about to say welcome to Amp Up Your Vizzes, but as you've seen, we went out on Sunday night, realized that calling it Amp Up Your Vizzes was a big mistake. We should have called it Jazz Up Your Vizzes. One of very many mistakes made on Bourbon Street that night, I think. So, my name is Tom Christian. I'm a sales consultant. I've come here from London. I'm joined here by my colleague Jenny from Australia.
Hi everyone and welcome. If you're trying to place my accent, I'm not originally from Australia. I'm from Bulgaria, but I work in the Sydney office. So I guess we should just straight jump into the content.
So I normally agree, but something we've picked up over the past, I suppose, few days here is that there tends to be a tradition of really long introductions about ourselves. But Jenny, do you have any pets or anything that we can show the guys?
Not really.
Do you think we could show people pictures of other people's pets? Do you think that's
not a good
okay?
idea? No.
Do you have any hobbies or anything of interest, maybe?
I like to drink wine on the beach.
I'm not sure that counts as a hobby here as much as it does in London, Australia, or as much as my mum considers it a hobby. Something that we do have, though, is a clicker that doesn't work. Magic. We have dashboards. So Jenny and I have spent and invested a ton of time in Tableau over a cumulative of about 7 years, I think, in total. And in that time, we've been involved in hundreds and hundreds of dashboards. I've made some I'm proud of, some that I'm not so proud of. But in that time, we've learned tips and tricks and things that really, if you say, okay, how can we immediately go from nothing to something that's impactful, then there's a short way to do it. What am I doing wrong? Talk amongst yourselves, it's fine. Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Thank you. Woo. Round of applause for the tech guy. So today's session is a Jedi level session. Now, I know when it comes to identifying as Jedi, that's a strange thing. And then when you say, okay, I consider myself to be a Jedi, somebody had a lightsaber somewhere near the front, he's an actual Jedi. When you say, okay, you're a Jedi, I should know design principles off by heart, that's sometimes true, but if I think of my own personal experience, at times you start learning things that look good, and you know when something looks good and when it doesn't, but you don't always know the quickest route to get there, or you don't know the underlying principles that make something stand out and be impactful. So a lot of today we'll be looking at what makes something impactful, truly impactful. We'll be talking through the hows, the principles that define something that becomes impactful. So if you take this as a checklist almost, then these are the things that if you check that they're there, then guaranteed your work will stand out and look great. And lastly, of course, there'll be tips and tricks to make sure that whatever you do, there's something that you'll learn and take away from today's session. If I start with an impactful visualization, there's one that stands out in particular for me in my time involved in Tableau, and it's this one from Ben Davis. This is looking at Premier League, so football with feet. We covered that in IronViz yesterday. He stole my joke, damn. But something that stood out here for me is I'd never seen sport results presented in this manner before. What it's actually doing is this was the ranking of teams from that season, where they positioned, so Chelsea unfortunately won. Liverpool, the best team undoubtedly in the world, came fourth. No booze, you're not allowed. But what it does is it shows the relative results for when they played those teams that were relative to each other, home and away. I'd never seen anything presented like this, so just to unequivocally say that Liverpool were the best, you see that they struggled against some of the worst teams, so they got too complacent. Typical, really. Another really impactful viz is this one from Klaus. So some of you may have seen Klaus at yesterday's IronViz. He stood up briefly. And actually an entirely different viz, not only different subject, different topic, but actually there's just a single view here. And it's impactful in the way that, especially because we're in the United States and maternity leave is a debated and hotly debated topic, the fact that the US stands out in that corner of this chart, it's really impactful. It sends a very clear message. It's also interesting here that Bulgaria, so where Jenny's originally from, gives you something like 3 years maternity leave. Why did you leave?
Well, if you've seen Iron V's yesterday, you know it was the weather. So I just told my mom, sorry, Mom, I'm going to Australia.
Your poor mother. And another great example, this is from Sarah Bartlett. She runs the London Tableau user community group. And this was her entry for Iron Viz in Europe. And it's stunning. Something here that makes it feel really infographic. It makes you want to explore. So this is just a subsection of this viz. So when you scroll down, you see more cities. But it presents the information in a clear and easily digested manner that makes it really enjoyable to use. So each one of those examples, completely different in the story, the message, everything that they're saying. But every single one of them follows these clear principles. And we can kind of borrow tenets from UX and UI. Because if you think about the way that Tableau is typically presented, is all the media that you're creating is going to be digested through the web. Somebody's likely going to go through a browser. If you're printing off your Tableau dashboards, we'll have a talk about it afterwards, and I'll tell you off. But the first thing you can do is always leave a good first impression. When we talk about good first impressions from a design point of view, we mean those first 3 to 4 seconds when somebody looks at content. It's not going to scare them away, basically. It's going to entice them to read further. The next, and really important, is it digestible and clear? So we saw that with Sarah's example right at the end. The message was super clear. We saw it with Klaus. It was super clear in terms of where those countries stood relative to one another. The clearer the message that you're purveying, the better experience you're going to have with your users. The third is a really interesting tenet. This is about how familiar the way that you've chosen your design techniques to present your information is to your audience. And the reason this is so interesting is it can be so flexible, it can be debated. But ultimately, if it's familiar to your users, then they're going to have a sense of comfort when they experience using your content because they know where they should interact. The fourth is not only a tenet, but more than likely a goal of what we're all trying to do here in the audience, which is we're all trying to delight the users of our content. But there's another aspect to this, which is not only are we ultimately trying to delight them, but we're also trying to make their experience delightful too. So when they click around, things work. They show things when they should, hide things when they shouldn't. And the fifth, and possibly one of the things that I consider the most important out of all of these, is it should not distract from whatever message, whatever story you're trying to convey to your users. Otherwise, the whole point of your design is lost. This is especially important in the world of BI and analytics, because if you distract from the message, then everything is gone. Your users won't take away the thing that you're trying to tell them is important about your data. So when it comes to sticking to these principles in your design approach, we've got a few different topics, a few different things that you can do to ensure that you stick to these tenets when designing. And the first of those is storytelling, and I'm going to hand over to Jenny to take you through that.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to start by telling you a real story. And this story starts in Australia. So 3 months ago, I went to one of my most favorite places on Earth, called Byron Bay. It's a small coastal town on the east coast of Australia. And some of you know that Australia is being called the land down under, where women glow and men plunder. Well, I'm not sure about that last part, but it's definitely down under, which means that 3 months ago, in July, it was midwinter. So I didn't go there to just chill at the beach. This photo is a bit deceiving. I went there for a festival called Splendor in the Grass. And in addition to being full of people taking confetti showers, it's also one of the most trendiest music and art events that one can go to. But don't take my words for it, just look at some facts. So the 2018 edition of Splendor attracted 37,000 people. There were 102 artists across 13 stages, and there were some big names, one of them being Tom's favorite, Khalid.
So actually today I found out that that's not DJ Khaled. It turns out there's another one.
Yeah, there is. But there is only so much 102 artists can do, right? So there were 18 bars to help with the entertainment, and 72 food stalls to help with the bars. And last but not least, on average, 49 people had to share a single toilet. And I really didn't need the stats to realize that's the case. But let's put things in perspective. So Splendor is massive, but only in Australian terms. If we compare it to festivals that you might be familiar with, such as Burning Man or Coachella, or even Mardi Gras, it's not as big. So Mardi Gras attracted approximately 1.4 million people earlier this year. So you're probably wondering, why is she talking about a festival? So usually, I love festivals, but the effect they have on my well-being is always the same. So alcohol combined with loud music, 3 days out in the cold, and flying equals me getting sick. And that's what happened this time. The day after the festival, I got home, sick with fever, coughing, blocked nose, and on the next morning, I realized that I've lost my hearing. Shortly after, I was diagnosed with sudden sensory neural hearing loss in my right ear. My left one was relatively fine, but still quite a shock. So I was like, how is that even possible? What are the odds? Turns out, 1 in every 5,000 people is affected. So yeah, that's me up there. Lucky, right? And I thought, how will I explain this to people? Like, what's the first thing that happens in a case like this? You get a hearing test. So I went to the doctor, and this is my initial hearing test, or as the doctors call it, an audiogram. So this audiogram is a data visualization. It has the data, it has the visual representation of that data, and it's supposed to answer some questions, right? But when I first looked at this, I was confused, to say the least. I saw the comment, severe SN loss, but that's all. I couldn't understand the scatter plot, and I had a number of questions. What do these shapes mean? Which indicator shows my left ear, which one my right? What's good and bad? Where does a healthy person stand on this graph? The only person who can decipher this dashboard is the doctor, not the patient. So this simply gave me the verdict. So what I thought I should probably do some research. I had a consultation with the doctor, and only after I did these things, I was able to understand what the audiogram meant. And I still had to explain this to my colleagues, to my family. I had to tell Tom, you know what, I might not be coming to Tableau conference.
We dragged you here anyway, made sure.
So I built some things. First, I looked online for examples. I found a few that explain it. Some were really bad, like this one. Others maybe less bad. But they all helped me understand how I can communicate information in a better way, what to do in my own viz and what not to do in my own viz. And I started with something simple, showing which sounds can I hear with my right ear. Not a lot of people understand decibels, but everyone knows what a whisper and a firecracker sound like, and those two sit at the two extremes. And there are a lot of easy-to-grasp, relatable sound sources that cover the whole range. So you can see, I can hear anything louder than a lawnmower, but I cannot hear my alarm clock when I sleep on my left side. Then I redesigned my initial audiogram in Tableau and kept adding new data after each hearing test over the course of 3 months. So here you can see this is my left ear, so that's the healthy one. So over the course of 3 months, it improved from mild hearing loss to the normal hearing range. If we compare that to my right ear, it moved from profound hearing loss to moderately severe. So the improvement was not as good as I was hoping for, but still, it was fun to keep track of it. I learned a few things. So this story has no ending yet. That's how I am at this right moment. But hopefully none of you is wondering why I'm telling you this story. We all use data to tell our stories, to convey messages, whether we realize it or not. So I think an epic data story can be boiled down to 3 things: data, visuals, and narrative. If we lack any of those 3, there is a high chance that we fail to convey our message. We can have a beautiful dashboard, we can tell a great story, we can sit on data gold, but if we don't have all of them together and we don't tie them well together, we won't make an impact. So if you have all 3, are there any specific tips that I can give you on how to tie them together? Yes, there are. And the first one is clarity. By clarity, I mean, what is the core purpose of your dashboard? What are the key questions that you're trying to answer? Do you understand the data? Is there maybe additional data that you need to answer that question? And does it speak to your audience? If you're building content for other people, this is likely a process. It requires you going back and forth, asking people why. Why is this important to you? What is the action that you like this dashboard to drive? So in business scenarios, finding clarity is a continuous process. And you'll be sure to make mistakes, to iterate and improve your content along the way. I'll give you 2 examples. They're very different, but think of them as 2 different approaches on how to tell a clear story. The first one is by Eva Murray. So here she has a clear story to tell, and she's laying out the facts for us, drawing the conclusions for us. Women are underpaid in Australia's 56 highest paying professions. The way she's outlined the view, she's leading us to the conclusion. And there is very little interactivity because the purpose of the dashboard is to explain, not to explore. The other example is by Tom, and in his dashboard, it's more like choose your own adventure. So he's allowing us to explore a fictional portfolio of assets by asking several questions, so each component of the dashboard answers a different question. What is the current fund value? What is the latest daily percentage change? How is each investor performing? What is the value per sector? What are the top and bottom 5 stocks? So this is giving us a framework throughout which we can find our own story and draw our own conclusions. And actions and filters allows us to ask additional questions. What are the top and bottom 5 per investor? What are the top and bottom 5 per sector? So once you find clarity, how do you engage your users? Let's look at this example by New York Times. They have a section called You Draw It. And I think media companies in general are really good at kind of understanding how difficult it is to keep someone's attention throughout the story. So they're putting the reader in the driver's seat. So here you have to draw your guess on how the unemployment rate was performing throughout President Obama's administration. So only after you've made your guess, you click on Show Me How I Did, and you're presented with the figures and the narrative around it. So it really puts you in the driver's seat, and you're invested in the analysis because you have to first think about it. So how do we achieve the same personalized experience in Tableau? We can start with parameters, for example. They're a really good way of allowing user input, which drives the data and the content and the visuals. So here, we can choose our own investment strategy. And the first thing we have to do is answer a few questions. How old are we? How much we want to invest per month? How many years we would like to project? Then we choose the strategy based on our risk profile, and we're presented with the corresponding portfolio returns. And additional actions, again, allow us to tweak and test different scenarios, which makes it even more engaging. And the last ingredient is stickiness. We want our dashboards and vizzes to be sticky, to be engaging, to provoke understanding and memorability, and really create an impact. This example by Skylar Johnson is the one that really stuck with me because it fully supports the data and the story he's telling. So here, he's visualizing Spotify streams for Gustav Holst's symphony, The Planets, and each of the symphony movements. So the dashboard itself resembles our solar system, and each planet is one symphony movement. The size of the planets is the number of Spotify streams. But what's even more interesting here is that the dashboard is alive, meaning that as the song goes and as the time passes, planets rotate around the sun for their song duration. So I think it's a really great example of how sometimes, depending on your audience and the story you're telling, you can really go a bit charged and crazy, if you like to say so. So it doesn't need to be a simple visualization always, as long as it supports your story. If we have the same data in a bar chart, like here, just number of Spotify streams by symphony movement, it wouldn't be nearly as memorable. So in summary, the 3 ingredients of an epic data story: clarity, get to the question, ask 5 times why if you need to. Engagement, personalize your dashboards, draw your users in. And stickiness. Make sure that you're telling a visual story that really supports the data and the message you're telling. And now Tom will share his expertise on color and how color can make your visualizations sing.
Thank you, Jenny. So just quickly before we move on to color, when Jenny showed me this the first time, even I didn't realize that the visuals that she was showing was Tableau. And that's exactly what you want from your audience at the end of the day. They don't really care that the data is being presented to them in Tableau. They care about the fact that it sends them a message and that it has a clear story behind it. And there's no reason why you can't present things like financial data in this way. I would know because I have to work with financial customers every single day, and it should be presented that way. Because if you think about it, it's more engaging for them. If you want to look at something yourselves, you're always attracted to things that are on Tableau Public, for example, more frequently. And because you're more attracted that way, there's no reason why your business dashboards can't be more attractive too. There's also one more thing I just want to highlight as well, which is, if anything, the most important thing that is always missed is that narrative. And sometimes narrative can be a bit like watching a kid's school play where they know and they've really learnt their lines, but they've forgotten the context of what they're saying. So if you've ever seen The Room, it's like an entire movie where that's happening. It's scary. So for those of you that were lucky enough to get my attention for a beer yesterday, or until we drank all the beer and moved on to wine, then you would have known that I really do like to talk about color. In fact, my shoes are very colorful right now. I feel like I've one-upped Andy Cockgreave in color choices. But color's a really, really impactful way to adjust and display the message that you're trying to convey to your audience. In fact, I'd say that it's probably the most powerful thing that you can choose to do out of all of your design decisions. If we take this from one of our Zen masters, this is a dashboard from Mike, it's going to do one of two things. The color here is going to immediately make you think of Sam Sparro's Black and Gold song and have it stuck in your head forever. Or as somebody said the other day, Wiz Khalifa's Black and Yellow. Or it's going to forcefully shove oil and gold into a way that you can't deny what the message of this story is about. Color here is being used in a fantastic way, so that message, that story is super, super clear. Another non-Tableau example is straight out of Andy Kirk's A Handbook for Data-Driven Design. And the fact is, although there's text here describing what's going on, the choice of color applied to this bubble chart means that it's really hard to ignore the fact that we're talking about red and white grapes. It's a really fantastic use of color to support the visualizations we're creating. So when it comes to color, there are two things that you can control to decide the color. The first being the hue itself, so this is the most obvious thing, it's the choice of color that you're picking. Certain colors clash, certain colors don't work well together, and you can use that to your advantage as well. And the other one's intensity. So saturation levels between different colors as a variable, for example. But there's something I want all of you to bear in mind when you start using these powerful color choices in your visualizations, which is the thing that we want to avoid is this. This is something I've come to politely call unicorn puke. And unicorn puke, we've all been there, I've been there, is that point where you get really excited with your color choices. Maybe you've just discovered your next favorite color palette in the community. You apply it to absolutely everything you can. Next thing you know is you put it all on a dashboard and it looks a bit like this. And it's never this bad. But the reality is when you get to this point, color has no meaning in this view. You've taken the most powerful thing that you can use and destroyed it. When I raised this with somebody in our development world some time ago, she gave me possibly the best piece of advice I've ever received, which is when she designs anything inside of Tableau, outside of Tableau, everything she does is done in gray. Now, I need to apologize. I didn't actually realize that you guys spelled gray differently here, or to put it adequately, wrongly, incorrectly.
Same with color, though.
But to be frank, gray doesn't specifically have to be gray. There's a fantastic design guide by Taylor Orwell looking at web UI design, where he talks about bluing grays. It's a weird concept. But really what it means is that you should have a base set of colors that are just going to be completely nothing to your audience. They're just going to be that base color that's going to not really distract or add anything, which is important, really. To use Ava Murray again, this is looking at wealth inequality in the United States, and the majority of stuff on this visualization is black or white or gray. And ultimately, that's the stuff that you ignore. That's the stuff that moves into the background. Because the thing that she wants you to look at is the thing that's purple. So that's the top 0.1% compared with the bottom 90%. And what we can see very clearly because of this use of color is that wealth inequality has changed, that it's diverging, that it's getting to a point where that bottom 90% is equal to the top 0.1%. That's all driven by the fact that there are just two colors, really, ultimately, on this view. Something else, this is looking at a sad time in my nation's glorious history. Which is fairly recent. This is looking at Brexit. At the time, I was looking at a few tweets that were going around the time of the event. And I used the same type approach to draw out insight into this viz. But something that was important, because it was a fluctuating set of events, tweets change all the time, is really I wanted that gray to be dynamic. So all you need to know is that most of these people are politicians, except for James Dyson, who sells great hoovers. And what was happening in this time about 2 years ago is well, lots of things, but there was an event that became known as the Battle of the Thames, which was, you can think of fairly aged men and women floating down small yachts along the River Thames, shouting at each other on megaphones. Quite embarrassing, really, but they did it nonetheless. And when this event happened, if I move into the future now, you can see the people that were mainly involved in this event at the time all of a sudden become prominent into our view. So if I get it right in the middle there. So Bob Geldof, George Osborne, Michael Gove, Nigel Farage, these were the people that stood out during this time frame. And you can see that they're different to the people that we originally had, so their color choice is now prominent, everything else is other and gray. So how you can do this with your own data is very quickly, you can create, first of all, a set. So in this case, I want to focus on the top 4 people that are being discussed at any time. So I have a top 4 set. And now in my dynamic top, all I'm saying is if they're a member of that set, give them a name, otherwise they're bucketed into this other group. It's nice and simple, and the reason I want to highlight this example as well is as we move forward with set actions, you can use calculations like this to do some really powerful, unique things as well, but still make sure that you're highlighting the things that matter in your view. So for example, when we saw that drill down in the keynote on Devs on Stage, they were doing that to show that there was a distinct drill down as they drilled down, and it was based on exactly this type of calculation. A few more really good examples that use this technique. This is Andy Kriebel's dashboard looking at America's most popular national parks. And the idea is, as a user, you can go through, pick your favorite parks, and then they're highlighted relative to everything else. So color here is a fantastic way to show that relative value, especially when you have lots of data in the view. This is one of my favorite examples from not this year, but last year's IronViz in Europe, and this is David Perez. And actually here, the gray is, as I kind of mentioned before, it's blue. The base gray in this case is a dark blue color. And if we zoom in slightly, gray is actually being used as the highlight color. But the principle is still the same. We're still having a dull set of base primary colors and then bringing to life the insight that we need to see with a distinct clashing color. And one more, just to show Sarah Bartlett's viz, she did exactly the same thing. So again, the gray is a blue here, and she uses gray to do her highlights in the bottom, so we can see that Kiev is an expensive city to eat in. That is fact, if you need to know that. But again, color becomes really powerful here because all of a sudden there's this base. A fantastic resource that you can take away and take back with you is this from the BBC Audiences Guide. They have an incredible guide that goes through very similar design principles to what we're going through, not just color. But if we look at their section on color, they use the same principle. So non-data elements should be that black to gray to white color. It's the easiest way to make sure you're not distracting your audience. Another example from the web, this talks about the principles of primary, extended, and alerting colors. And the one thing to take away from this is we've already discussed primary colors, but extended colors is where you get your flair, which is where your kind of dashboard comes to life. These are the things that you should use to draw attention to the things that matter in your viz. But actually, alerting colors, especially again going back to the finance world, alerting colors are those things that really people instinctively go to first. We've kind of been in this perpetual state of using red, amber, green for as long as I can remember. But actually, in principle, you should avoid alerting colors as much as possible because they actually incite an emotion in your audience, which isn't always the best thing. So you can look at psychological studies where red actually incites fear into people. And when you get to green, it should incite relief, but instead it's fear and perpetual fear that you may go back to amber. So you should always try and avoid these colors. To show you how this works in practice, how this looks in principle, so this is a dashboard. It's one looking at imaginary banking data. I can't help but look at that now that I'm in the world of finance. And if we started this from the beginning, I might design it like this. So everything I've done is done in gray or white or some light gray, just so I can say, okay, I've designed my dashboard. I know I want to make it look like this. But what are the things that matter to me here? Well, I want to know if something's hit target. I want to know if something's above or below a certain threshold. And really, with those KPIs, I want to know how they're performing. So we can add our extended colors. And here, so for example, this particular bank might have purple as their primary logo, for example. So we can use purple to draw whether or not something's above or below a threshold. And actually, although I've said try and avoid it or use it sparingly, the use of red here immediately shows us where something's at risk. Same thing again. This could have been, that purple could have easily been blue, but that's just your choice of extended color. Again, it's the thing that's drawing you to the attention, the things that you look at. And comparing between the two, other than personal preference, likely you're really not going to care much, but you're still driven to the same points, the same few areas on this view. If you're looking for inspiration with extended colors, then this resource from Canva is a fantastic way to find specific hues from images in the web. But better still than this is Neil Richards. I absolutely love him. He's fantastic. He's created a version of this on Tableau Public where each one of those 100 images he's created in kind of area tree map type charts. So if you two really like classy and timeless, then you can select it. It shows you exactly what you need to put it straight into your color palettes. Really, really useful. Now, this is a bit where I kind of challenge myself slightly. So I've already told you to avoid puking like a unicorn, but this is probably an occasion where I've done that. And the times where it starts getting okay, which is here, most of your attention is probably going to be drawn to that bottom right corner. And actually, so this is a dashboard looking at server statistics, and I'm trying to make them exciting in some way. But a lot of your attention is going to be drawn to that bottom right corner of this dashboard because it's the most colorful. And actually, that's not really particularly a good thing. But the only time it really becomes okay is when you make this interactive, so at least those colors fade into the background when you start highlighting things that are of importance. So in this case, I might be looking at a certain type of query that Tableau server's sending, and then all those other colors fade to the background, so at least I get that relative scale still. That's the times that it makes it okay. And one more thing I just want to throw into this color section, because I absolutely love it, is now we have transparency in Tableau. Finally, at last, yes. And this is the first dashboard I created when we released transparency. And this, actually, if you look at it at the core of this dashboard, you wouldn't really tell. You wouldn't be able to tell really that there's much transparency going on, other than the fact that there's a gradient that goes down it. And actually, this is exactly how transparency should be used. To show you how it shouldn't be used is exactly like this. Again, it's never quite this bad, but now using transparency, you have features like pie charts within pie charts. 3D effect maps. Take out those old cinema glasses. Now, you shouldn't do this, but actually the real principle is everything that you use, even if it's transparency, every new feature that comes into Tableau, just make sure you're not distracting from the message that whatever it is that you're trying to tell in your dashboard using those features. So quick summary here in color. Don't be a puking unicorn. Avoid it. Be a sparkly, shiny one instead. Get your message clear to your audience. Use grays as the most powerful thing that you can do to make sure that your message isn't lost in translation or in color. And now I'm going to hand on to Jenny for the next section. Jenny, you forgot to give your session a title name.
I did.
How could you?
People are already quoting you about it. Don't be a puking unicorn. Actually, Tom's tips and techniques on use of color are amazing. Personally, for me, the fade to gray thing was like an eye-opener because I've always struggled with color choices. And I'm sure there are a lot of people here in the room that are the same, so thanks. Does anyone know what this section is about? It's about text and why text matters. So text is a key attribute of any dashboard. So I want to start with a few examples again, so showing you what learnings we can draw. And the first is by Adam McCann. His visualization is outstanding in a lot of ways, but what I want to focus particularly is the use of text. So he's telling us the story of Bruce Springsteen. And it is indeed a history. If we take a look on the right-hand side of the dashboard, he's walking us through the history of Bruce Springsteen, telling us a bit more facts and background about his career, a description of each album that he ever released. So as we scroll through the story, we're highlighting the corresponding album on the left-hand side in the viz. If we hover over a lead single from any of the albums, we're presented with additional information such as the popularity of the song, the emotion, the acoustic, and a short text highlighting the inspiration behind the song, which I think is pretty cool. And because the layouts and the chart type is not your typical easy-to-understand chart type, Adam has also included additional information, additional text and annotations to help us read the chart. So what's the role of text? To complement and enhance your visualization, to create a clear and powerful message. And we can use text in many ways. We can use text to introduce, to explain, to provide more details, to contextualize, to guide our users. And I took a few, like I showed you an example from New York Times. I think, again, media and stories and articles are a good place to start to see how people use text on the web, and you can get inspiration from them. Let's look at another example by Samuel Parsons. Here, this viz is looking at the most expensive prime property across different countries around the world. So what are the text components? We have a title, which states the purpose of the dashboard. We have a subtitle, which further explains the key question that he's asking. So the wider the stretch or the longer the line, the more square meters we can buy with $1 million US. The content in the middle, if we take a look at the radial chart, the annotations give us a point of reference as well as highlighting insights that he found. So Sao Paulo is the least expensive, Monaco is the most expensive, and LA falls in the middle. Lastly, the guidance on the right is helping us read and understand the chart. This example here is one of my first vizzes, and there's probably a lot I would change now if I had to redesign it. But I've used certain best practices, and I still use them to that day, and I want to highlight it. Just a bit of background before I start. At that time, I was really obsessed with the Outlander books and TV series. So here I'm looking at different episode ratings in IMDb. I'm also curious to know how many people have watched the show, and I want to know and analyze whether the TV series affected the book sales in any way. So the titles and subtitles are helping me explain and navigate. Additional information on Hover provides certain background and context around the dashboard. This is not immediately needed, so it's provided only on demand for the end user. The content in the middle is dynamic, which means that the text is provided on selection, as are the labels. And then that last part where I ask how did the TV series affect the book sales, we have a title, which states the question. We have a subtitle with some call to action, the content where the data is. We have guidance in the form of reference lines and annotations. And then we have detail in the tooltip providing additional information. What we want to avoid is this. We want to avoid confusion and distraction. So if we take a quick look here, maybe the viz on the left where you see the squirrels, you would probably agree how important the use of text is and the use of color, and how important is for those two to be aligned. So ultimately, less text is more. We want to be pointed and concise when we're choosing our text for the dashboards. If it doesn't add to your message, just leave it out. And keep your text close to the data. You can use annotations, tooltips, labels to do that. And talking about tooltips, these are two great features that I would encourage everyone to use. Tooltip selection is actually a highly underused feature, which is great for dynamically exploring your data in a visual way. Well, you all know that visiting tooltips is simply awesome, and here Tom, in this example, has used it in a really clever way, combining several visualizations and creating this mini scorecard to track the stock performance for each of the stock symbols. And now I'm going to do a quick demo to show you how you can, let's see. Okay. So the demo is a recent trick that I discovered, and again, it was from a blog post from one of the Tableau community members. And it's a simple calculation in action, but it's a really clever way to change the level of detail and provide different tooltips depending on what you're looking at. So in this viz, we have category profits by different categories. We have 3 different office supplies, technology, and furniture. And when we hover over one of them, we see profit and sales over time for all 3. If I just select one of them and I drill down, I get a different viz in the tooltip because I've changed the level of detail, and then for that second layer, maybe I need additional detail that wasn't showing in the first place. So in this case, I'm looking at profit versus sales for each of the subcategories that fall within the office supplies category. So how can we do that? The first thing we have to do is create a calculation. And I'll show you how that looks. So this is a simple LOD calculation, which effectively gives us a result of true or false, so it's a Boolean type. And what we're doing here is we're counting the number of categories that we have on the viz. So if it's 1, it returns true. If it's more than 1, it returns false. Then we have to use that Boolean calculation in a case statement where we give one sheet, the scatter plot, when the value of the calculation is true, and the other one, the line chart, when it's false. Then instead of putting the original sheets in the tooltip, we have to go to the tooltip and use the calculated field. So rather than going here, insert, and selecting the sheets, you just put the calculation. And then the last thing we need to do is on the dashboard, create an action which will be a filter action with the same source and target sheet. So it's essentially a self-filter, which allows us to just click on it and select a single category. All right, so I think that's a really interesting way to change the level of detail, and you can use it with various vizzes depending on what you want to show. And now, we're going to go back to the slides. And Tom will show you a bit more about layouts and chart types.
Thank you very much, Jenny. So just very, very quickly on that last example, the reason why I think that's super powerful is if we go all the way back to that tiered structure and the different tenants, what we're doing using that example is ensuring that as you drill through into your detail, the tooltip stays relevant to your audience and the message that you're conveying. So it's a great way to have an element of control in what you're showing your users. So with layout and chart types, this is one of the most contested areas, I think, within Tableau when it comes to this final piece of design, to bring it all together. And if I think of somebody that nails layout and chart types generally 9 times out of 10, I think of Johnny Walker. And this is an effort that he put together with Sophie Sparks. Johnny Walker really likes his birds, by the way. But something I want to highlight here is this incredible, impactful visualization really uses bubble maps and bar charts and nothing else. It's actually quite simple in its use of chart types. But the message is really powerful because of the way it's laid out, because of the way it draws you through the story as it goes through this visualization. Something that's available for all of you right now to use is something from the Financial Times called the visual vocabulary. The visual vocabulary is something I've used for years and years. And if we compare chart types to text, actually the way that humans have read and digested information for as long as I've known is through media. So people in media need to get this spot on every time they convey information to an audience, and their audience is wide-ranging, so they always need to choose the best methods to display information. And the visual vocabulary tells you exactly that. So it tells you which visuals are the best to display certain types of information. And since the first time I started speaking about this, Andy Kriebel's actually gone away and recreated the visual vocabulary in Tableau. So available for you on Tableau Public right now under Andy Kriebel's profile is the visual vocabulary with Tableau built charts. So this is perfect because not only can you say, I'm doing a certain type of analysis, so example, magnitude type analysis, I have the charts ready to go so I can reverse engineer how he's built them in Tableau and recreate them for myself. It's the perfect way to learn and apply these charts. The same goes here for spatial type charts. But something I particularly love about the visual vocabulary is it reflects the way that us ourselves consume information, which is we're forever changing. As an audience, we constantly see information displayed in certain ways, and data becomes acceptable presented in certain types. So new to the visual vocabulary is the stream graph and the bee-swarm diagram. And something I love even more is that our community is 10 steps ahead of that. So this is Rodi Zakovic. He's actually got a step-by-step how to create a bee-swarm chart in Tableau from about 2 years ago. So it's already there if you want to choose this as your method of presenting information. Now, many of you are familiar with this meme and contribute to the cat gallery at the start. Those of you that have been around cats are also familiar with this. But we can apply this meme to this kind of conundrum when it comes to picking chart types. This comes from the visual editor at The Guardian. And how many of us can relate to this? It's kind of what I go through on a daily basis. And the fact that the fancy data viz is absolutely petrifying. But to kind of put this into Tableau terms, if we were analyzing sales and profit, then on occasion, this is probably the best way to display the data. Sometimes something like this can be the thing that makes your dashboard impactful, that makes it stand out, even if it's not quite the best choice for your audience. Somebody that's also gone through this conundrum is, again, Rodi Zakovic. And he's the guy that created this iconic queen visualization. I remember it from about 3 years ago now, I think. And I remember thinking, this is awesome. I didn't even think that you could do something like this in Tableau at the time. But if you hide and you take away that iconic image of Freddie Mercury and the title at the top, that message is lost. And actually, all we have is wavy lines. And he went through this on a blog post and detailed how really what he ended up doing is becoming obsessed with this concept of bending and waving lines. And sometimes this is the best choice to display your data. This is looking at sales for potatoes year over year across different countries. And just iterating on that, really, is I agree with him that sometimes this is the best way to display the information. But if you can apply enough context to your visuals, then why not go bold? Why not go something exciting? But it just has to be clear. It just has to add to your message and not take away. Something else, and you may be wondering why I'm showing you Bohemian Kitchens, is like Bohemian Kitchens, there was a question asked at IronViz yesterday, which is, are you team tiled or team floating? So like Bohemian Kitchens, I am team tiled. And something I see as being massively underused within Tableau, especially by Jedis, is the temptation is to float everything. To actually refer back to Johnny Walker, one of his presentations this week, he advocates the use of floating everything. And I think that's okay, but only if you're building a one-off visualization. If you want something to be flexible from a design point of view and actually to containerize things together, then really, really, you need to be tiling, and you need to nail tiling. So in 10.4, we introduced padding, which made also tiling become awesome. I think it was a second-class citizen for a little while. So I absolutely love this feature. But to show you my favorite things coming up now for tiling, I know, it's incredible. 2019.1 lets you I don't need the applause, I didn't do it. I just thanked the guys that did. 2019.1 means that you can now name your containers. So this is an example of a viz I'll show you in a short while. And you can see that everything here is given its own title, so I know what it relates to. I know the sections that I'm referring to as I click through the item hierarchy. Keep on top of this, because this is your ultimate key to then having a successful tiled dashboard. And you'll notice everything in this dashboard is tiled, which I'll show you in a second. Something else I highly, highly suggest is when it comes to padding, reverse the norms. Make your outer padding 0, your inner padding 4. And actually what you'll get is that bleeding edge design. We'll see a few examples of that in just a second. And I see this skipped too many times, which is distribute evenly. It's the whole point of having containers, is that everything can line up neatly. So I'm actually going to skip this in the interest of time and the fact that everyone wants to get away for flights. But something I want to show very quickly is when I talk about that bleeding edge design, is if I take this dashboard, which is, again, fully tiled, and just fade it away to the things that underpin this, is really this is a horizontal container with 2 verticals and a blank that's using that color. And outer padding is set to 0 for everything. Inner padding is set to 5 or 10, depending on how far you want your content away from the edges. But that's what gives you that nice edge-to-edge view. Jacob, who was also mentioned yesterday, he uses that kind of combination of floating and tiled, which I think is good, but can fall down at times. I think it's slightly short, not to call Jacob out because he's a fantastic designer. But to show you this in practice, this is that same dashboard we looked at before when we were looking at color, just the purple variation. And everything here is tiled. If I go to my item hierarchy, you can see everything down here has its own name. So I know what relates to what, so I know that I've got a vertical frame. I know where my title and my filters lie. I'm going to skip that because I don't need them. And then if I focus on this vertical thing, which I've called KPIs, it's where I've got my KPI diagrams. Because this is all tiled, it's so easy for me to use the item hierarchy and swap things around in this tree, and everything, including the item at the side that tells whether it's good or bad, joins together and moves as one solid unit. That's why you need to use tiled, because ultimately it becomes really easy to swap this content around in a design point of view. So again, tiled is the most underused thing when it comes to layouts. You should always use it more. But when it comes to chart types, it's hotly debated, and I can't give you an answer which one's going to be always appropriate, but you have to ensure that your message is clear when you're using these chart types. And if you nail it and you put it all together, who knows, you'll be on stage at IronViz next year, or making great vizzes about birds, like Johnny Walker. And Jenny, this is you.
Thanks. On the point of tiled, actually, I'm same as Tom, big fan, especially when it comes to creating content for my clients. I think that saves a lot of time, makes it a lot more manageable. If you're building kind of like Tableau public vizzes that are not maybe business-oriented, that are not a report that has to go out regularly to a lot of people, then maybe floating is better. But yeah, just keeping that in mind. And in summary, what we went through today, so we talked about storytelling, how you can bring clarity, engagement, and stickiness to your vizzes. Then we talked about color, how you can highlight things that matter and be smart in your color choices. Then we talked about text, how this can really tell a narrative and support everything around the data and the story that you're telling. And finally, we looked at layouts, which really tie all these concepts together and will help you in your journey when you're creating content for people.
But Jenny, can you hear that? Can you hear it? Oh, wait, sorry, the wrong ear.
Wrong ear, yeah. No.
I think the audience are asking for...
Are they? Some of them are leaving, but hopefully someone is asking for more. So there is a lot more that we can cover in 1 hour, unfortunately, and we actually ran over time, which proves the point. So there is all of that you can take and use in your vizzes. However, be smart about how you're using that. As we said, less is more. So just make sure that it fully supports your story. It answers the question that you wanted to answer, and it really creates an impact.
And then to leave you with one final data story before you all disappear. I went through this process recently, which is I moved into the world of finance, thought I'll try and earn some money using Dashboard to try and judge the stock market. This is looking at moving averages over time. To end the story very abruptly, I didn't make any money. I lost plenty of money, and it was a bad idea. But I got to this point, I was super happy with the design, and then this happened. I published it to Twitter because I was really proud, just to highlight that. Spell check is great. I'm not going to spend 60 minutes talking about that, but really the process is, it didn't even matter because I looked back at this 2 months later, and when I wasn't even using it this way, I was using it in a completely different way. So one more thing just to add right at the end is, as much as every one of these points, each and every topic is super important to make your design stand out, just remember that you can always iterate, you can always go back, you can always change and make your content even more powerful further down the line. So that's not relevant anymore because we're at the end, but thanks to these people in the community for inspiring us to make impactful dashboards, and thank you all.